Hello, and welcome to the Ability event. Today's session is the third installment of our sessions concerning U.S.-China Deaf Project that highlights the collaborative research through people-to-people exchange that Dr. Kathryn Johnson and Dr. Amy Noff have been conducting. My name is Joseph Jones of the Harkin Institute, and I'm very happy to welcome you here today. Thank you for joining us. And in today's conversation, we're going to focus on pre-K through 12th grade education for students who are deaf in China. Dr. Amy Noff and Dr. Kathryn Johnson have also invited some of their Chinese colleagues to participate in this program and throughout. And so today we're very happy that they're joined by Suzanne Mai, Jiyan Zhu, and Yukon Yang as a part of this conversation. I hope that you will enjoy and have a great day.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathryn Johnson. I am the director of the Confucius Institute at St. Cloud State University. I'd like to just summarize the introduction by Joseph Jones. He was the executive director of the Harkin Institute at Drake University in Iowa. He welcomes our panelists for this evening and our team of deaf interns and visiting scholar. So we're very excited for our session this evening. First, I want to start by thanking our interpreters, Jenna and Amy. Thank you both for being here this evening. I would also like to thank our partners in China. We have Jilin Hanban, and we have Voice of Hands for the Chinese Sign Language, on Ding Talk, Ding, D-I-N-G, Talk in China. And we also have Kai Zhao and our colleague Hao from David Huang for translating our session into Chinese. So thank you all for making this team effort available, not just in Minnesota, but in the United States. We have participants from different countries around the world that are interested in learning more of this work. And I'm really excited to see so many colleagues, both deaf and hearing, from China join our session, both on Zoom and on Ding Talk in China. So we know we've been challenged, but each week we try and get better. So thank you to our team and everyone. So tonight we're going to be focusing on K-12 education in China. And I want to just share briefly how important each of these 5 sessions are. Today is our 3rd session in a 5-week session as part of the Ability event, celebrating the 30-year anniversary of the ADA and celebrating the 30-year anniversary of the disability policy in China. So for me personally, I'm celebrating my 20-year anniversary of traveling to China. And my first trip, as some of you have heard, was the inspiration for my dissertation. So tonight, I actually went to my home library and found my dissertation, Deaf Education in China. It was a little dusty, but the title of it was actually Deaf Education in China, 2002 to 2020. When I wrote this dissertation, I included policy recommendations for the Chinese government and for international organizations working together between the United States and China. And I'm pausing just a little bit because I know I'm going a little too fast for my colleagues in China. Sorry, Kai and David. Part of the policy recommendations included recommendations for K-12 education, teacher training, and how we can have teachers be more accessible to the language needs of the students who are deaf. interpreter training recommendations, the significance of having Chinese Sign Language interpreters who are competent, trained, and certified in natural Chinese Sign Language. And also, as far as the international organizations, when I was reviewing my dissertation a long time ago, I really made an emphasis on the need for people-to-people exchange and people-to-people diplomacy that was inclusive of research, collaborative research for advancing knowledge and understanding between our two countries, and how that knowledge can help to facilitate development and global competencies for students in both countries. One of the areas of recommendation was for international student teaching experiences. And I think when I look back on it, at that time, I was really thinking about students from the United States going to China. But what I've come to realize and understand in working with my colleague, Dr. Amy Noff, and our team, is the significance also of having student teachers and interns from China come to the United States. And so what we'll be sharing today is how that policy recommendation has transformed under the work of our Confucius Institute in actually having international student teaching experiences for students who are deaf from China. And so today, when I look back on this, I think about these 3 deaf interns who some of you have met in our other webinars. They were most likely in middle school when I was doing my research in China. But the visiting scholar was in college. And so maybe you've heard she was at Beijing Union University. Beijing Union University. Thank you, Jenna. And I didn't realize it until recently how my first trip in 2000, I did a presentation there and she was in the audience and one of the student groups that we presented to. So to have Xiaorong here with us in the United States as a visiting scholar is, I don't know, it's one of those moments where you just pause and reflect and be thankful. Even in the midst of all that's happening with COVID-19 and the trials that we're experiencing, this is one of the moments where we say, yes, I can't get on a plane to China. And my colleagues from China that we want here can't come to the United States. But here we are. We are still experiencing knowledge sharing and experiences of our partners that are working with us. So I'm really excited to also introduce, in a moment, you'll hear from our interns and visiting scholar again. But one of the people along my journey in working with China is Dr. Amy Noff. And so Dr. Knopf became and was awarded a Harkin Institute Fellowship. And she was able to complete research also in China. And it's interesting to see how where I was at in my journey and the policy recommendations at that time, and then to where Dr. Knopf was able to go in 2018. And then today, actually this evening, this morning in China, we will be able to hear from our interns about their experience in education, elementary, middle school, and high school. And then also about their different visits to schools in the United States. We'll be able to end our session this evening with a discussion about, so what now? And where are we at with what they're learning and the knowledge that they have attained in their experience here, and what what can we bring back to the discussions regarding deaf education and employment and advocacy in China? Another key aspect of one of my recommendations was empowerment and deaf leadership by individuals who are deaf themselves. And I think that will be demonstrated tonight, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. So for right now, I'm going to say Sai Qian for now, and we will welcome, oh, that's goodbye. And goodbye, Jenna. And we will welcome Dr. Amy Noff. Dr. Amy Noff, could you please join us?
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm going to try not to use sign language and allow you to just watch the interpreter. First, I'd like to provide an audio description for the audience. I am a white female in my 50s with short gray hair. I have on my Chinese Confucius Institute shirt that says thankful, and it's the Ability Event shirt. And I'm wearing purple rim glasses, and I'm sitting in my basement broadcasting to you tonight. So I'm really excited. I think I want Dr. Johnson to come back on the screen just so that we can, yeah, because I miss you. So good to see you. As Dr. Johnson had talked about her research from 2000 to 2020, it was really ironic that when I started my journey of research and my interests, the things that I was interested in were some of the same topics, some of the same areas that she researched. And in fact, I went to some of the same schools in which her picture was on the walls.
Still there.
Schools in China. Some of the things that I found were a lot of similarities. And I don't know if it was the same during your time, Kathy, when you were researching schools 20 years ago, but I found some similarities between US schools for the deaf and China schools for the deaf. And one of the things that I found that I thought was really interesting is China has been focused on inclusive education. So they're still trying to figure out what inclusive education is and how to incorporate it into their public schools. And so because of that, a lot of deaf students are now being mainstreamed. And so the schools for the deaf are shrinking, very much like the schools are shrinking here in, I'm sorry, I'm talking too fast.
I'm saying slow down.
Telling me to slow down. I get excited when I talk about my research.
I know. Okay.
But it's an interesting phenomenon that, you know, both in the US and both in China, schools for the deaf have decreased in the number of students that they serve. Many students are going to mainstream schools. I did visit a couple schools, but they're currently, I did not know of any schools that provided sign language interpreters or CSL interpreters, and there may be a few. I know on our session last week, there were a couple participants who said that they went to a mainstream school and had a very positive experience. And so I would be really interested in following up with some of our viewers if they attended a mainstream school with a sign language interpreter or with services like captioning like we have tonight. So that would be a strong interest of mine. The other thing that was really interesting is students who needed more services. So maybe deaf plus, or students who are deaf with autism, students who aren't deaf but have multiple disabilities, cognitive disabilities. Some of the schools for the deaf were kind of splitting and using half of the school for those students and then half the school for students who are deaf in China. So I thought that was an interesting phenomenon that now deaf students were now going to school with, you know, students with really severe disabilities.
That was about, I want to say about 5-7 years ago. And really there's been a push for educating students with autism. And so as students left the schools for the deaf to be more mainstream, that it opened the door for more students with autism to have an opportunity for an education, right?
Yeah. I did meet with, I only met one student who was deafblind my whole time that I was in China. And that was when I was in the city of Zhengzhou. This young woman went to school, and there was a ton of volunteers who provided her with assistance every day to go to school, but she wasn't really being educated. She was just allowed to go. And so I do think there was a lot of interest last week about deafblind, and I do think that is an area that we can do more research and provide more resources. The other similarity that I found was much like the US, the majority of educators are hearing. In the US, of course, we do have a lot more, and in the last probably 5 to 10 years, we've had a lot more deaf educators and more educators who are becoming administrators who are deaf. But in China, I'd only met a total of 5 teachers who were deaf from the 9 schools that I visited.
Mm-hmm. And most of those teachers, based on their education within higher education, tend to be art teachers.
Yep, they all were art teachers, the ones that I met.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Knopf.
All right.
Is there more that you want to add, or should we switch and get our interns on here?
Well, I do want to say that, you know, when I went to the schools and did my research and interviewed so many people, parents, I interviewed teachers, administrators, and some students. The one thing that really struck me was the passion that people want to do.
Yes.
They want to know how to educate deaf students, and so many parents that I spoke to just really had wished that they had more resources when their children were born, because most often the parents that I spoke to, they didn't realize that their children were deaf till much later. So I think one of the big takeaways or impacts is I think there's a few areas in China that are starting to have newborn screening, but it's not countrywide. So I think that would make an impact on the education system.
Right.
Those who are deaf, if they were able to be identified early and then provided the choice of being immersed in sign language instead of, you know, an oral only approach. But
right.
I'm excited to hear about our guests tonight and to hear about their experience, but also recognizing that many of them, it's been a few years since they graduated, and there have been some changes.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Knopf. May I also, I'm sorry, when I started, I forgot to give a description of myself.
Yes.
I am a woman, white woman in my mid-50s, and I have red hair, short on one side, a little bit longer on the other. And I have green glasses. I'm living in a log home, so there are logs behind me. And I have on this evening one of my favorite Chinese jackets that I had made in Beijing. So thank you everyone for participating. Okay, Dr. Knopf, I'm going to leave and then you may invite our next guest.
Yes, I am so excited to welcome our next guest, Ms. Xiaorong Zhou. And Xiaorong is spelled Xiaorong. Last name is Zhou. And she is my colleague. She's a visiting scholar at St. Cloud State University. And so we've been working on doing a collaborative research project with some schools for the deaf. And so I am just thrilled to have her here tonight. So Xiaorong, what I'm going to ask you is if you can please describe to us what your experience was like in your K through 12. And then after you talk about your experience, I want you to think about visiting the schools that you've been here in the United States. You've been to Minnesota State Academies for the Deaf. You spent quite some time at Delaware School for the Deaf. And did you go to ISD, Iowa School for the Deaf, as well for a short time? So if you could tell us, after visiting those schools and having some time, you know, what kind of resources would you like to bring back with you when you go back home? So thank you and welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Xiaorong, you can go now. Go ahead. You can share your, yep. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, hello. I went into kindergarten when I was 9, and people sometimes wonder why I went so late. I was raised in Wenzhou, in the southern part of the country, and there were not many deaf people there. And so school was delayed. I was a year late going into school. When I went into a school for the deaf, I believe there were about 400 students. Some used an oral method, they talked, but many signed. We used Chinese Sign Language.
We were asking her to slow down a little bit.
So I enjoyed Chinese writing and Chinese art and paper cutting. I was very, very good at that. I wanted to study Chinese language, be able to express myself musically or with poetry. I had been exposed to this through siblings, and I wanted them to teach me. And so every day I would write or draw. But the curriculum for Chinese class, including math and history, I really excelled with language. And I really wanted to learn that, and I wanted to study art, but I studied what I was told to study. And when I went to high school, I was patient and finally graduated from high school. Am I okay?
Oh, okay, I'm gonna add in. Yes, you're doing okay. You're doing fine. No, yeah, it's okay. Just go slow. Just go slow. That's all. Thank you. Okay, carry on.
So, Kathy, I'm good to go. Where was I? Okay, so the curriculum in high school classes limited to one art class. I mean, it was just like what I had seen before. And I saw what kids who were able to hear had with history, writing, language. They had all of that, but I only had 2 classes. So again, I accepted what I was given. I wanted to study more Chinese writing. So in high school, I went to Hangzhou This is our sign for Hangzhou. And there was a teacher there who taught Chinese writing and communication. It involved music and writing and art, less art. But I should have studied that at university. But anyway, I went through many frustrations up through high school. When I came to America, I was at MSAD, the school here in Minnesota, saw children who were deaf and using American Sign Language. At 5 years of age, their language was like that of what a hearing child at 5 is using. They signed very quickly. I was able to communicate well with them. But some of the words and the speaking so in meeting some kids who were deaf plus, deaf with other disabilities, that was very inspiring to me. Kids who were autistic or deaf with Usher syndrome. Kids with various disabilities on top of their deafness. And they would come to me and tell me or show me, talk about their other disabilities. And at the student center, there's a student center approach, taking kids based on who they are and how they come to that class. And so what is it that I can teach this child, but maybe a child who is deaf with autism may not need the same thing as a child who is deaf with Usher syndrome. And
Amy, 1 second. They're having, one second. They're having problems with understanding you in China. So I don't know if it's your microphone, if you can a little bit closer, we'll try that, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so kids here have IEPs. They have an individual education plan that is based on what they need and the accommodations that they need. We had nothing like that in China. There was oppression in China. It was more a case of getting us through school. And I see kids here with deafness and other disabilities being able to be educated. So suppose I would see a child who physically was unable to write, but they were taught living skills. They're taught living skills and they're given what they need in their school. And they would be given accommodations and technical accommodations to allow them. I saw kids who were language delayed. And those children were learning life skills. We were teaching life skills. And maybe they learned a little slower than other kids, but they were allowed to learn and to be able to grow up with skills. And in terms of working in a mainstream setting, I saw children who had interpreters provided for them, and there was really no difference between them and the other children in that school. In terms of sign language classes, parents who were hearing who did not know sign language, I saw advertisements and flyers for parents to have the opportunity to come learn sign language from a very basic level and work their way up to be able to communicate with their kids. And when I first saw that, I thought, why is this happening? And people were telling me that families, brothers, sisters, parents need to be able to communicate with the deaf child. So I wish, I graduated from college in Korea, and what I studied there I feel wasn't enough. I want to study more. I'm working on planning my PhD, and I'd like to sit on some sort of educational board, and things that I learned here and there in Korea, I'd like to be able to take back to China.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That was wonderful.
Camera off?
Yes, camera off for a minute. So,
Amy, 1 second, this is Kathy. When we have our next participants, let's ask them again to please slow down. They're like you and I, and they get so excited when they sign, but our interpreters in China just need them to slow down a little bit, okay? Thank you.
yes. So this next person I would like to introduce, I'm really excited about. I met in Zhengzhou, and in 2018 when I was there for my research, and he had been teaching himself American Sign Language and even a little bit of Japanese Sign Language. I was very impressed with him, and he wanted to come to America to learn more. He wanted to learn English. And so I was really moved by his passion to want to be in the United States. And so I told him that I would do whatever I could to try to get him as an intern here in the US. So I'm very excited and very proud to introduce Jiaxin, Jiaxin, Mai, M-A-I. There we go. Before you start, make sure you describe yourself and sign slow. Thank you.
Okay. Hello. My name is Gaxin Mai. Are we ready? My name is Gaxin Mai, and I am wearing a shirt, a black shirt from the Confucius Institute that has the thankful on the front of it. I went to kindergarten in my hearing school. I was the only deaf person out of all of the people in my school, and I was unable to speak. I would try to write. I would throw papers. I could gesture. I was gesturing, and that's how I would communicate, was through gesturing. And in that school, all of the teachers were hearing. And so I learned very quickly, eyes are very important. However, I was unable to hear. So it did not help me to learn anything at all. It was very difficult. I would look at homework and not understand. I had a classmate, and I would say, I would gesture, what is our homework? And my classmate would then tell me what it was. So I studied at that school for 6 years, and then went to middle school. And I wanted to study more. My parents wanted me to go to, my parents wanted me to continue to go to a hearing school, but I was able to go to a school for the deaf. I did not know any sign language at that time. And I went into class, and everybody in the class was like me, deaf. And that is where I started to learn words in Chinese Sign Language. And then I started to get a better understanding of words and language. My teacher was able to sign. And so through that experience, I started to learn. My teacher, through signing and writing, helped me to understand going forward. So that was middle school. And I went into high school. And looking back now, going to a school where everybody was hearing and nobody signed, being able to have that language and to be able to sign at school made a big difference. So here I have been to MSAD, the School for the Deaf in Minnesota, and the high school as well. I have seen here different classes and teachers who are working both one-on-one, doing one-on-one instruction and classroom instruction. And again, when I look back to my deaf school, I didn't see any deaf teachers. And I see here what a blessing it is, because those kids who are deaf like me have a teacher who is deaf like them. So my hope in learning what I've learned in America about education is that when I move back to China, I will be able to advocate for more deaf education and development there.
Thank you. I'm so excited that you are here in the United States and you're having the opportunity to be at the Minnesota State Academies for the Deaf. I know that you're having a wonderful experience.
Yes.
So now I would like to introduce our next intern. His name is Ji-Yuen Hu, and it's spelled Z-H-I-Y-U-A-N, and the last name is Hu, H-O-U, and it's signed like this. So I'm very happy to hear your stories of growing up.
Okay. Are we ready? Hello, my name is Yuen, and I am a man. I've got black hair. I am wearing glasses. I am wearing a black shirt with the word that says thankful on it. I am from China. I am from Taiyuan. At home, I was born hearing and started school at a hearing school. There were no deaf people there. And shortly after going into that school, I had studied there for 1 year. I was very, very behind with speech and language. And my parents were worried and looked for a school and found a school where I could go with deaf kids, with deaf children who used sign language and a speech, an oral approach. And so that was great for me. But still, lip reading and speech reading with a hearing aid, if I took my hearing aid off, it was hard for me to be able to use speech without a hearing aid. I was able to socialize okay, but still, speech reading or using speech was not something that I did well. When I went to high school, I transferred to Nanjing. And it was the same there, both speech and sign language. And I studied and I learned. But what I learned was things that were very difficult. This was not easy. And so I kept working on speech and art. So I worked very hard and graduated. When I came to America at the Minnesota Academies for the Deaf at MSAD, watching and seeing, being involved with K through 12, I started working with children kindergarten to 2nd grade. And I saw lots of sign language and deaf teachers and everybody using American Sign Language. And in January, I flew to the Delaware School for the Deaf. And I was there with Sharon. And we went into an ASL class with a teacher named Christine. And spoke with her about how she was teaching and what she was teaching and working with children ages K through 2nd grade. And kids who were deaf and autistic, kids who were learning delayed or had some cognitive issues. Christine had very creative ways in pulling language and playing through art and those kinds of things, drawing with these children, and to be able to make learning to read and write and draw, color, work with these children to be able to meet them where they were in terms of their educational needs. So for me, thinking about going back to China, I want to study like Sharong. I want to study the curriculums, and I want to take that back to China. And I want to serve as a deaf advocate and implement programs for learning and opportunities for learning. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to see how much your ASL has just grown, and it's so beautiful to see. So thank you, GUN. And so now for our last intern, I would like to introduce Yukun Yuan, and it's Y-U-K-U-N, Yuan, Y-U-A-N. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, my name is Yukon. I am a man. I have black hair. I have a lot of black hair. I am wearing a black t-shirt with the Chinese words that mean thankful. And I have a background behind me that is gray. I remember when I was in Shanghai, for school. No. First I went to a hearing school for kindergarten in Xining. And I had a hearing teacher who would speak, not quickly, but would speak slowly. And I learned that watching the speaking was helpful for me. I was able to see that, but it was very tiring. It was fatiguing. Then I went to Shanghai. Where? I went in to school for 1 year, and it was a school for the deaf. And I didn't know really anything about deaf people or sign language. And I started to learn there. And it was a good experience. It helped me to learn language. And then I went to Nanjing for Chinese higher education. And I learned a lot, but from kindergarten, from school, with technologies such as hearing aids, lots of kids were wearing hearing aids, and they would go to class and they would require signing and talking, but it was the signing using the exact Chinese. There wasn't, the teachers were saying we must use that, and the students, it was very oppressive actually, to be able to have. I apologize for going so fast. Okay. So the teachers were saying that you must wear hearing aid. If no hearing aid, you would not be able to learn. It was very stressful trying to learn to speak and to sign, and it was stressful. So I've had some experience wearing hearing aids in school. And when I came to the US, I've been to 2 schools for the deaf. The MSAD and Fairmount. And ISD, Iowa School for the Deaf. And I didn't see anything like I saw in China, where you had to wear a hearing aid and you were forced to try to use speech. I saw nothing like that. I saw deaf teachers and people using sign language and teaching through sign language, and students watching and learning through sign language, through storytelling. And then the students would have an opportunity to tell a story, and they would go around the room. And teachers would check the students' sign language, and if something wasn't understood, the teacher would say, okay, let me say this again, so that the sign language was really what was focused on. And I thought that was beautiful. So when I go back to China, my hope is to see deaf Chinese teachers using deaf Chinese language, and that students are not just having things talked to over their heads, but that we're able to use technology such as video and pictures, so that students are able to learn through their eyes, through language that comes to them that way. It's so much easier. And I think that with deaf-blind, being able to use special technology that maybe helps them to see a little bit or to understand, we have nothing like that in China. And I would like to see in China, schools welcome students who are deaf and blind. I would like to advocate and study more about deafness, the people who are deaf and blind. That is my hope. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you. That is a great segue into our first question from the Q&A. We have a question from Hannah. And I believe this question is to Shirong. Hannah says, I have a statement to tell the woman regarding IEPs. I had one as a child, but I didn't have Braille on it. I really needed Braille, so I had to wait to finish learning Braille as an adult. Now, my question for the woman is, she said she didn't start kindergarten until the age of 9. So explain more about how did you progress from each grade in relation to your age? So Shirong, can you come back on camera and explain how were you able to get through school to high school when you didn't start school until the age of 9?
I will add the closed captioning said the wrong name. Sorry, it's Xiaorong. Xiaorong is being asked to start her camera again. So 1 minute, there she is. Thank you.
I'm reading. Oh, about IEPs.
Dr. Knopf is explaining in the question again to Xiaorong. How did you learn from kindergarten all the way through high school? When you started kindergarten, 9 years old, how did you progress and understand and do your education?
I have a deaf sister, and she and I communicate using Chinese Sign Language. She taught me how to ride a bike. She taught me how to read. And so I was small for my age, and as I grew, that's why I was delayed in starting school, but I had my older sister to help me.
So your older sister helped you to go quicker through school, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And then I want to add one more thing. I actually wanted to skip a grade, and the teachers would not let me.
Why not? You can't skip in China? You can't?
It seems today you can, but back in my time, at least where I was living, they told me no. They told no.
In Wenzhou, yeah. Okay, we have another question. If I can get the interpreter back on. This question is from Vivian. And so Vivian, you may have to explain more about what you mean about, are there great support services or programs in China to help students with disabilities pursue higher education? I'm assuming that you're talking about, are there some kind of transition services from high school to college? Am I wrong? Did you want to answer that, or is there one of your colleagues?
I knew I wanted to go to university to study. There's a test you have to take. And if you don't want to go to university in China, then you would just go on a different track. There were just different approaches or different tracks. And I knew I wanted university. But advocacy, I'm trying to think, really, I mean, they were really pushing, I was really getting pushed to study drawing and art back then.
Okay,
Oh, sorry.
I have another question from Steve, and I think it's a really good question. And Steve is a friend of ours, and I think you met Steve, and he has cerebral palsy, and he wants to know if deaf individuals who are deaf plus have a physical disability, such as cerebral palsy, if they're viewed differently than just being deaf.
Well, there's a big difference. In China, people with physical disabilities, what I remember really is that people would take pity on people with physical disabilities. Here in America, I see advocacy and I see support and I see encouragement for doing what they want to do. It's very different, America, compared to China. So again, deaf people with other disabilities through support are able to do anything. Again, depending on level of accommodation and things that need to happen for that individual. America has services here. China, I can't speak to that. I don't know. I would venture to say they don't have services like that.
Yeah, I did not find any type of transition services or like employment or any kind of support services at schools for individuals who are deaf in China. So there was a lot of interest from many of the universities that I attended, and maybe now they're starting to think about setting some things up. But there wasn't at the time that I was there in 2018. Sounds like Kathy's going to tell us about something. Go ahead, Kathy.
So there are some nonprofit organizations that are working to develop transitional programs, vocational training programs for young people who might have multiple disabilities. So there are actually some really good programs in different areas of China. And I know that wasn't the focus of our discussion. I appreciate the questions that have come up in our Q&A, but I think it's complicated, it's complex. And so within 1 hour, we know that we can't have a deep discussion about all of this. Mm-hmm. What I value, though, is at least opening the door to awareness and the power of people-to-people exchange. And this discussion would not be happening without the support of Confucius Institute and Hanban valuing the inclusion of people with disabilities. So Xiaorong is here as a visiting scholar, funded through our Confucius Institute, as are the 3 interns. And so the knowledge sharing and the research that is being done through these partnerships, we hope will continue to expand the dialogue about opportunities between not just China and the United States, because I know in this program we have colleagues from the UK, from Australia, from different countries around the world. And so the knowledge sharing goes beyond borders of any country. And I think it's through working together that we have collaborative opportunities for all of us to increase our global competencies, which then advances knowledge and understanding to promote opportunities in education and employment. So Dr. Knopf, is this an okay time to say thank you to our participants? Okay, so thank you everyone. Xiaorong, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Dr. Knopf, thank you for wearing that lovely shirt. I am thankful. I love my job and I love the opportunity to share with everyone and have you be a part of this journey. So, all right, everybody. Sorry for the questions that we didn't get answered. Yes, Dr. Knopf?
And we will continue this discussion next week. We'll be talking about higher education in China. So join us next week for this China talk, but also join us tomorrow at noon for our Lunch and Learn. We'll be having a great discussion about the intersection of race for individuals who have a disability and are immigrants. And we have Paul Ajuan and Theo Russo, who will be with us, having a discussion about that tomorrow at noon. So see you all. You have a good night. And it was wonderful having this conversation with you all. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our interpreters, both ASL, Voice Chinese, and Chinese Sign Language. It's a complicated translation system and we're learning every week. So thank you to our interpreters in multiple languages. 谢谢，再见。
谢谢。
谢谢，拜拜。